Star wide receiver T. Higgins is the top free agent on the market and also would fill a huge need for the Chargers, but unfortunately, after the latest news, it feels like that dream might be dead.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers together for 9 seasons now, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to all of the everydayers out there for making us your first listen today. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, or listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Daniel, I was really looking forward to the opportunity for the Chargers to potentially bring in T. Higgins because I thought there was absolutely no way that the Cincinnati Bengals were going to be able to pay him and eventually pay Jamar Chase, because that's a lot of money to tie up in your wide receivers. But it seems like the Cincinnati Bengals are going to try to do exactly that. So unfortunately, it might be something that is out of reach for the Chargers, but somebody who may be in reach that could help offensively is running back Najee Harris, and we'll see if that is going to be a fit for the Chargers. And will the defense that was so much better in 2024, are they going to regress heavily in 2025?
That might be an overreaction, but that fits today's show because it is Tuesday and it is our Chargers buy or sell, getting into the biggest storylines and overreactions. And all the buzz on Monday was about star receiver T. Higgins, who, when you have the cap space the Chargers have, and when you have the need at outside receiver that the Chargers have, a lot of fans were hoping they would get a crack at T. Higgins. And according to Jeremy Fowler, it doesn't seem likely because he says one team source says they believe the Bengals will use the franchise tag on Higgins if no long-term deal is reached by the March 4 tag deadline, in quotes, in order to have time to get a deal done. Can't let him walk. And also, you have our very own Locked On Bengals host James Rapine, who says the Bengals are going to franchise tag T. Higgins if they can't get a deal done. And it is buy or sell Tuesday, and this could be some sort of negotiation tactic, but it does seem like, David, buy or sell, the dream of the Chargers getting T. Higgins is dead.
Yeah, as much as I don't want to say it, as much as I don't want to believe it, it does seem that it is very much dead. So I have to buy it. And maybe it was a dream that he was ever going to make it to free agency, just because you could easily see why he would fit so perfectly in the Chargers offense. He is a true outside receiver, a guy that makes plays. I mean, 4 or 5 seasons over 900 receiving yards, an average of 13.9 yards per reception in his career, and had a pretty good 2024, 73 catches, 911 yards, and 10 touchdowns. First time he hit that mark in his NFL career. So it just sucks. Just sit here and see somebody you could envision catching passes from Justin Herbert, going to continue catching passes more than likely from Joe Burrow.
Yeah, and there's a little jealousy there too. Obviously, Joe Burrow has the one thing Justin Herbert does not, which is 2 kind of alpha wide receivers to throw the ball to. And obviously, the Bengals were a bad team this year, weren't good enough at least, and they have their own flaws they have to worry about. And that's a little risky, paying 2 receivers probably $30+ million. And since they're franchise tagging him for the second time this year, if they do it, it'll be close to $26 million they'll have to pay him this year. And they have the space to do that if they want to do it. It'll be more in the future and what the long-term deal looks like with him more than anything else. But this is my thing. I mean, it would have been awesome to see what he did this year, because one thing you didn't mention about his season this year, he missed 5 games and still almost put up 1,000 yards.
That's wild.
And still put up 10 touchdowns. And you saw how good he can be, and he put on a personal audition for the Chargers when he absolutely torched him in prime time. T. Higgins has all of the things that you want in a prototypical number 1 receiver. And I think when you do something like this and make a deal for a guy like this and give him the money that he's going to get, you're hoping that you're going to get more out of him than you've probably ever seen. Because I don't think you're giving that kind of money to someone who's never had an 1,100-yard season. Something that, by the way, Ladd McConkey just had, right? T. Higgins has never done that in his career. But He's also been overshadowed by Jamar Chase, who was the Triple Crown leader who led the league in receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, and receptions in 2024. So it's like, oh, well, that's the only reason he's not doing more. And the Bengals have to know, that he's probably not going to put up much better numbers than he's been putting up when you have someone like Jamar Chase that you're going to pay as well. But I do think that signing T. Higgins always scared me a little bit. I'm not going to sit here and say I wouldn't have loved for them to sign T. Higgins, but the problem is with T. Higgins is he was going into free agency as easily the top guy available. Guys of his age don't become available when you put up what he's been able to do. He also has missed 5 games in each of the last 2 seasons, so a little bit of concern there, and it did feel like this year potentially he was going to really take his time because he wasn't on a long-term deal, and you can question that part of it if you want. The other part of it was he only had 1 season where he had more than 7 touchdowns. So it wasn't like he was this red zone juggernaut his entire career. That was the first time last year. He did it in 12 games, which is super impressive. You see it. He looks the part. You could see him being a dominant A1 receiver. And for the Chargers, who had such a need at outside, a receiver that is dynamic but also brings a lot of different things to the table than Ladd McConkey does and can win one-on-ones outside consistently, it was awesome. It was awesome to think about. But paying him $35 million, that was always risky. And you want the Chargers to make big swings, right? But I think you want more than anything for those big swings to pay off. And you don't have to look very far in Chargers history to see some of the big giant moves they made that all blew up in their faces. And one of the reasons that Joe Ortiz was so beloved for the deals that he made this last offseason is because none of them were big. And the other part of it was none of them mortgaged the future salary cap of the team. It was 1-year deals. It was very moderate deals that were all very, in line with what they needed to do last year. But this year they have a ton of money to spend. So it does suck that the Chargers can't pair Justin Herbert with T. Higgins. At the same time, it was always going to be risky. Paying that dude who's never put up $35 million per season numbers to come do that for you, that would have been a tough sell. I mean, I would have liked them taking a big swing. It would have told you kind of where they feel like they're at in the timeline of contending for Super Bowls, but it was always going to be a huge risk, and you would have been trying to get in a bidding war with every other team that has a lot of cap space in free agency, like the Patriots, who might have tried to pay him $40 million a year. You just never know. But it brings up this buy or sell we have from Josh Zilla, who says, buy or sell the Chargers trading for DK Metcalf after the T. Higgins tag news. So I'll buy it from the standpoint of there's one less premier weapon that's out there available to you. I'm not going to go and say, hey, I'm buying the Chargers are for sure going to trade for DK Metcalf. But I don't think it hurts that T. Higgins is more than likely going back to the Bengals.
Oh, absolutely not. It definitely raises his availability up closer to the top of the priority list when you look at receivers that would fit that similar mold. Obviously, DK Metcalf is a freakazoid. I mean, he looks like he's chiseled out of granite. I mean, it's unbelievable. The size speed combination for a guy who's 6'4", 220 running as fast as he does is absolutely ridiculous. And obviously the Chargers wide receiver coach Sanjay Lal coached him, and back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons were a result of that coaching. So there's obvious connections there. It makes sense as to why he has been connected to the Chargers, and I feel like it's a deal that they definitely could do if they want to. It doesn't take a rocket science to see why it would fit and why it would still be a suitable answer to the outside, and probably a little bit cheaper than T. Higgins, although you will have to attach some compensation via trade, obviously some kind of draft picks, and more than likely a contract, but I don't think it's going to go into the $35 million per season area. So
no, I don't think it could. I mean, you're trading low for him in a way because he's not coming off his best season, and I just don't think he's been the same without Russell Wilson, and I think he thinks he could do more. I don't know how he's jiving with the new coaching staff and new regime over there with an entirely new coaching staff and entirely new offense. And I think the most likely way it happens is him making a mess of the situation, right? Like, the only thing we have linking them right now is that an anonymous NFL coach predicted that the Chargers would trade for DK Metcalf, because it just makes a lot of sense. Maybe that's giving you an inkling of how the league feels, that the Chargers are feeling urgent to go get Justin Herbert a weapon and pair him with someone after the way the season ended so horrifically in that playoff game. Yeah, that could be the case. I'm sure DK Metcalf would love to play with Justin Herbert. I guarantee it. I mean, especially with, what he's had. I think he wants to find a guy that can elevate him. And I don't know if Geno Smith is that guy. Justin Herbert has only ever elevated the guys around him. And look at the guys who left him. I'll say that. But that isn't the only buy or sell we have to get into today, because there's another potential top of the market free agent the Chargers could target. Najee Harris. Could the Chargers go all in on running back to try to improve their offense? We're going to get into all that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about FanDuel, because when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action, and if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature, especially in the old days with the Chargers. It was very easy to know when a potential chargering was about to happen, and you could easily make some money off of that. But I'm sticking with hockey because it's official. USA, Canada, Thursday night, and the Americans are very slight favorites at -113. USA all the way on Thursday night, baby. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you can get $150 in bonus bets. Come get your shot for that and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, David, let's continue this buy or sell here. And thank you to everyone who hit us up at Locked On LAC to get your buy or sells in for today's show. And this one comes from Drotalk SD, who says, buy or sell, the Chargers should replace Gus Edwards with Najee Harris. That's very interesting, David. Are you buying or selling that?
Yeah, so before I dove into the numbers and really kind of took a look at what Najee Harris has done in his NFL career, it was a sell for me. After I looked into his numbers, it's a buy. I mean, Najee Harris is the real deal. I mean, yes, there's some red flags there, and I'll go over everything here for you, but 4 straight seasons, over 1,000 rushing yards. And he's only been in the league for 4 years, okay?
Yeah, that's every year.
6 plus touchdowns in 4 straight seasons. Averaged just under 4 yards a carry at 3.9 yards, which, obviously that benchmark that you like for a running back is 4 yards a carry. So he's right there. But it's also this. 4 straight seasons, over 255 carries every single season. This guy has been used a lot. But you would think, well, he's probably missed some time. He's missed some games. He hasn't missed a single start. He has played 68 out of a possible 68 games in his NFL career.
Like that.
Which for a running back is absolutely unheard of. That is one of the most physically demanding and very vulnerable positions in the National Football League. They take more hits than pretty much anybody on the football field. So for him to be able to be on the field with that and be able to produce at the level that he has, I'm all for it. Sign me up. Let's bring him to LA.
Yeah, and I think I would sell it for the same reasons you're bringing up. Okay, well, first of all, I would sell it because of this. I think that in a vacuum, J.K. Dobbins and Najee Harris is a great pairing. I think their games complement each other very well. But the projection right now for Najee Harris's contract is something that should be looked at, because it's 3 years, $11.5 million per season. I'm not paying Najee Harris $12 million per season for a guy that averages 3.9 yards per carry. I'm just not going to do it. I mean, I'm also going to sound like a hater in this segment in general. I am not a huge fan of Najee Harris's game. I mean, I feel like they've been having discussions whether Jaylen Warren is actually the better running back there for the last couple of seasons. But I also don't think the Chargers would go out and spend for multiple free agent running backs. I don't see them trying to get J.K. Dobbins and also going out and going after a Najee Harris. And now, he would be much better, I think, than Gus Edwards would be. So in that part, I would agree. But you're also talking about giving a multi-year contract, in this case, going off the projection, 3 years, for a running back who's going to be starting that contract as a 27-year-old. That's getting dangerously close to the down years of running backs. I mean, you could already say he's past his prime, and also 4 consecutive seasons of 300-plus touches and being available every game is insane. But that's a lot of mileage, right? How long is that going to hold up? And you also added another 600-plus touches that he had in college at Alabama, too. So I would be very worried about the trajectory of that not continuing to go up for the length of the contract, and I just think it would be too expensive for the Chargers to add. I'd much rather than bring back J.K. Dobbins, and try to draft a running back maybe higher than you have in years past to get someone, that can actually be a dynamic player for your offense. Speaking of which, Louis Benson thinks there's a very underrated impact player on the Chargers offense over the last 15 years. He says, buy or sell, Melvin Gordon is the most underrated and underappreciated Chargers in the last 15 years. David, are you buying or selling that?
I'm selling it. Melvin Gordon had one season over 1,000 rushing yards. Yeah, he got close in one of those seasons. He had 997 yards, but
that sucks.
Let's not forget, Melvin Gordon held out for a new contract, okay? And the Chargers offered him $10 million per season, in which he turned down. So, underappreciated, underrated? No, I think he was properly. And also, let's not forget, the Chargers traded up to get Melvin Gordon. So, to think that he is underrated is insane to me based off of the stats that he was able to provide for the Chargers, which absolutely do not measure up to the trade that the Chargers and Tom Telesco made to bring him to the Chargers. I'm sorry, I do not buy it whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say in the last 15 years. It's hard to say who that would be, though. If you're talking about most underrated players, like honestly, I feel like Austin Eckler, just because of the way that he ended things with Chargers, I mean, which is more fresh than how things ended ugly with Melvin Gordon.
Yeah.
Who never ended up getting that 10+ million per season that he wanted, by the way. I think he was a little underrated. I'd say Adrian Phillips was a dude who like, you felt him so much more after he left than you appreciated him while he was on the team. Such an underrated part of that defense. He would be one of the guys I'd have up there. This is my thing with Melvin Gordon. I mean, this is, okay, to your point, Lewis, I think he was an underrated receiver. Like, I don't think he ever got the full chops of, his receiving, like how he was as a receiver and guys he made miss. I mean, he was a huge part of the Chargers offense at one point, and there was a lot of times where they're like, hey, Melvin, make somebody miss on a dump off and go get a first down, and he did that a bunch. He did also put up 3 straight seasons of over 1,300 scrimmage yards, so he might not have hit 1,000 every year rushing, but 1,300 3 straight years is pretty darn good, and had quite a bit of touchdowns in those seasons as well. But I think the receiving part was probably overshadowed by Austin Eckler, who came in and was instantly like one of, if not the best receiving running backs in the league. One season averaging over 4 yards per carry is the one that bothers me. Obviously, 1,000-yard season, like you said, but also 14 fumbles in those 5 seasons. And I think the other bad taste in the mouth of Chargers fans is several of those were inside the 5 or inside the 1 yard line, where a couple of them just are burned into my memory forever. Running against the Titans, I will never stop thinking about it. So I think that's why I don't think he was underrated or underappreciated. I don't know. I mean, like he did a lot and he was a workhorse for an offense, but he was never super efficient. And that would kind of be my thing with Najee Harris too, where it's like he's putting up big numbers, but it's not super efficient. And if I'm going to pay $12 million for someone or $10+ million for Melvin Gordon back in the day, I need you to be a special back. And I don't necessarily think Melvin Gordon was a special back, even though it's not his fault that he was traded, drafted in the first round. It's not his fault that he was traded up for in the first round. That's the Chargers' fault for thinking he was that guy. You don't pick where you're drafted, right? So he never lived up, I don't think, to that first round billing. But I do think there were maybe some parts of his game that might be underrated. But let's get to this last one here from Nathaniel Nature Erdman, who says, buy or sell, Chargers trade up in the first round of the NFL draft to go get their guy after a flurry of moves in free agency. You buying or selling that?
Yeah, I think when I look at this, I believe that there will definitely be some targeted strikes. They have a lot more money in this offseason. I think trading up in the first round, to me, requires a lot of compensation. I think a lot more than I think I would be comfortable with.
It depends how far you're trying to go.
Right? You're right, exactly. Yeah. The Chargers are 22nd, so I mean, if they're going to make any kind of substantial trade up, it's going to require a lot. I think a trade back is probably a little bit more viable in my opinion. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's, something in second or third round. This is a deep draft for defensive linemen and tight ends. So maybe they see an opportunity to maybe trade back or even trade up in those earlier rounds. I just don't know if it's as likely, in my opinion, as we stand right now, for them to trade up in the first round.
There's a lot of polarizing picks. So, like, if they, for example, only have, 15 or 16 first-round grades, and one of those guys floats down to pick 18 or 19, and you're talking about, a late day 2 pick, early day 3 pick to make that move up.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. I definitely could see that happening. And I think the nice thing is Joe Ortiz has earned our trust because although guys like Melvin Gordon are a cautionary tale, or Jeremiah Atauchu, or Manti Te'o, or Kenneth Murray, right?
We could be here all day.
Trading up doesn't always lead to results. But the
No.
good thing for Joe Ortiz is he's 1 for 1, and that one is freaking Lad McConkey. So
Yeah,
he
he's a
has my
beast.
trust. If he wants to go get a guy and somebody falls to them where maybe they didn't think it would happen, I think that could happen. I think it's more likely to what you were saying, though, where like last year, maybe they don't get a receiver that they desperately need in the first round. And then later on in the second or the third round, maybe they go try to get their guy then before the kind of run on that position happens. So I could see it happening. The Ravens traded back more with Joe Ortiz when he was there under their general managers than traded up. But you never know. He has my trust, and I think I would guess right now that there will be a trade in the draft, and I wouldn't say they won't trade up, certainly either. I wouldn't say that, hey, right now I'm saying they're for sure going to do it. I think the other problem is the guys like Tyler Warren, the guys like Ashton Genty that people want the Chargers to trade up for, I just don't think are going to be in the ballpark for them. And I'm not trading a future first-round pick to trade up to get anyone that I've watched so far. Maybe there'll be a guy I'll plant my flag on later on as we get deeper into draft prep and stuff like that. To me, if you're trading a future first-round pick plus your first-round pick this season for someone, it's a quarterback. That's a quarterback type of trade for me. I don't think the Chargers have that guy that's going to be able to fall to them close enough to 22 to make that kind of trade. I'm not doing it to try to trade into the top 10, that's for sure. But we still have more great stuff to get into, including if the Chargers defense is due for a massive regression and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. All right, David, well, we have some more to get into now because it is Buy or Sell Tuesday, getting into the biggest Charger storylines and overreactions. And thank you to everyone who hit us up at Locked On LAC to give us your Twitter buy or sells or called in the voicemail line, even though we couldn't get into the voicemails tonight. We appreciate everyone that calls in at 323-524-7924. And thank you, as always, for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, check out the new slate at Locked On NFL. I always listen because it's a great way to keep up with everything going on around the league, as the two shows they have bring on the hosts who cover their teams every day, with Tyler the Madman Rowland and his show, and also my guy Tony Wiggins on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from. David, this is an intense one here that we have from Shyla Oh Boy 858. Buy or sell. The defense massively regresses. Last season was a product of a soft schedule. David, are you buying or selling that?
Yeah, massively regresses. I'm going to sell. I do feel like the opponents, which obviously you can't pick your opponents, played a small factor in the Chargers' success. What played a bigger factor was a better defensive coordinator and a better defensive staff. Okay, Jesse Minter being able to teach his defense, and his staff being able to teach their defense to each position group, and you saw positive improvement from every single level of the defense. The defensive line was much better. The linebackers played better. The safeties played much better. The corners played a lot better. And you got contributions from players that you weren't exactly expecting, like two rookie corners that played exceptionally well. Also, let's not forget, Derwin James was an all-pro once again under Jesse Minter. Unlocking and weaponizing Derwin James is one of those things that, as long as Jesse Minter is here, I have a lot of confidence that this defense is going to stay among the best units in the NFL.
Yeah, and a lot of this is going to depend on what this defense looks like, right?
Sure.
You're working with a core of Derwin James and Deion Henley and Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart, right? Those are your kind of nucleus players. Maybe you throw Louis Gilman in there, right? I don't know. But outside of that, there's a lot of big vacancies. Like, okay, let's say this. Assuming that you can keep most of what made you good last year together. So you can bring back Apuna, bring back a Khalil Mack, right? Those huge parts you can keep in the fold. I don't see a massive regression, but I do understand what you're saying. I mean, this is a team that was the number one scoring defense, but a little bit fluky potentially because of who they played. 9th in defense in DVOA, which measures, it's more a weighted grade on who you're playing, right? A more accurate grade on it. And you played against Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, Spencer Rattler, Jameis Winston, Drake May, a broken Kirk Cousins, Will Levis, Justin Fields, and Bryce Young. And that's not including Bo Nix twice this season, too, who is a rookie, obviously, but they had a pretty good offense most of the season. So I wouldn't throw him in there. But that's 9 of your games, plus 2 against Bo Nix. It was a little fluky for sure. And we knew that it was a flawed defense. And against the good teams like the Ravens and the Bengals and the Buccaneers, what happened? You gave up 27 plus in all those games, right? The good offenses came and shredded you a little bit. I think he overachieved with the unit that he had. I think that they weren't a majorly more talented team than they were in 2023, but they were way, way better going from 23rd in the league in scoring defense to first in the league in scoring defense. That's not a fluke, right? Getting the most out of your players is not a fluke. The fact that they were a much more fundamental team that didn't blow coverages is not a fluke. The reason they were a better tackling team was not a fluke. A lot of the things are in place. They never really had the horses to be producing at a level that they were. So with a seemingly much tougher schedule, there's going to be regression. They could give up more points a game. They could be lower in the list of scoring defenses next year and still be a better defense with less massive flaws and potentially play better against the good offenses that they're going to play, even if it doesn't show up statistically. So I could see a regression as far as the numbers go. But with Jesse Minter and potentially adding some more talent to this defense in the draft and in free agency, I think they're going to be a very good defense again in 2025 and beyond, as long as Jesse Minter is there and they can keep the nucleus together. But this is from Chris Saiz, who says, buy or sell, Joey Bosa restructures to a team-friendly contract to stay with the team. So let's start with this. He can't restructure because he's in the last year of his deal, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean that they couldn't add a void year and restructure it next year, right? But it would have to come with some sort of extension or either him coming back from to a smaller deal after he gets released, basically, are the options. I think this is more about, is there a chance he comes back in general? David, would you buy or sell that?
Yeah, I think there's very, very little chance that Joey Bosa is going to come back, which, it does pain me a little bit because, he's, the last, not including Denzel Perryman because he left and came back.
When Denzel's a free
last
agent anyways.
San Diego Charger, that is on the current team. So obviously we're both San Diego guys, so that, definitely has a little place in my heart there.
Sure.
But when you talk about the production versus the money and the cap hit, it just doesn't make sense from a financials perspective. You can't pay somebody $36 million when they only get 5 sacks. And I still feel like Joey was great against the run, and he still set a pretty good edge. And he's still a decent player, but he's not a $36 million a year player. And that's why I believe that, as I've said many times, his tenure with the Chargers is going to end after this, in this offseason.
I think it would be much more surprising at this point that if he was a Charger than if he wasn't a Charger. And, you would have said that last year about some of these guys too, even Joey Bosa potentially last year. I think the hard thing is like if you release him, you're saving $25 million, right? Which is just money, huge money. Yeah. And I think the problem is about releasing him, then bringing him back. Okay, well, say you bring him back, right, and a better deal. Maybe he's making $15 million or something along those lines, right? You're already paying him $11 million on your salary cap next year anyway. So now he's a $26 million player. So it just doesn't make any sense. It was surprising to hear Chris Rim, when he came on the show, bring that up as a realistic option and give credit where credit's due. A lot of people hated this dude. And yeah, he got hurt. Nothing he can really do about that. But like, he came in and take a pay cut last year when everyone, you would have thought, thought this dude was the biggest villain on the team. And he made the sacrifice that not even Keenan Allen, although Keenan Allen shouldn't have made that sacrifice, was willing to do, right? Yeah. I think the problem is he just wasn't a great player, and I could see him being a better player. I just think he needs a fresh start, man. And I think for the Chargers, how long can you keep hoping? And I think that's where this one from the Federation comes from, where he says, buy or sell, bringing Joey Bosa back on a restructure would move the team backwards defensively. So if he took a pay cut to come back and they're paying him less and they keep him around, obviously we know at the top end he's really good. Can he tap back into that? I'm not sure, because he played 14 games last year and he had really good flashes, but the consistency and the dominance as a pass rusher just straight up wasn't there. But David, do you think that keeping him around could hinder this team if he was to stick?
Yeah, I'm going to buy it, actually. I do feel like it could hinder this team just because I don't know, as you pointed out, if there's going to be a point where he's going to be able to get back to that level of dominance that we saw
might be there right
in
now.
His career.
Yeah.
I just think that his body has went through so many injuries. I mean, as somebody who's had a couple surgeries, right? I mean, I've had a shoulder surgery. You never get that full strength back. It's just, you don't get that full range of motion back. And he's had way more serious injuries than I've had. Both legs, knees. Joey Bosa's back. You name it. He has went through a ton. And I just think at this point in time, he has given everything he has been able to give. And I don't think that there's going to be a level that he's going to be able to reach for the Chargers that it would make sense to keep him around.
And he played, like we talked about, the most games since he has since 2021, and that was awesome. But it still felt like he was out there not playing near 100% at all. And it felt like he was trying to make a point to stay out there and be there for his team and be able to contribute to a team that he thought could go do something in the playoffs. But, and you know, like Chris Rim said, in the playoff game, he showed up. He was one of, you know, that wasn't the defense's fault, really. But I think the other thing, too, is it's not like you have a Tuli Tuipulotu, right? But, like, if Khalil Mack leaves, there's not really anyone there. It's not necessarily like Joey Bosa would be getting in the way or stunning the growth of a young edge rusher behind him, potentially. We don't know what's going to happen in the draft. Maybe that feels a little bit differently. I think, yeah, if you could, in a vacuum, get him at a right price and have him for cheap, I think he would still be an impactful player for your defense. But there's also a huge chance, even though he was healthy last year, that you're paying someone a huge chunk of your salary cap, right? That's not going to actually be out there making an impact for you. And I just don't know how many years you can keep doing it. I think both sides would benefit with him, you know, with a fresh start somewhere else. So I don't see him coming back. Like I said, at this point, I'd be more surprised if he did come back. You know, would he move the team backwards defensively? Yeah, maybe, you know, if he's just out there trying to play through it and is kind of just a shell of himself, for sure. But I do think it's time to move on and find something different, especially because it's like, he's kind of hated by it seems like a decent portion of the Chargers fan base. You could go be the answer in somebody's kind of piece to put them over the top somewhere else where you're going to be welcome with open arms to eventually potentially disappoint them too. But like, what would you choose? To go back to a team that begrudgingly, you know, is keeping you at that contract, or going to a new place where you could be the new fresh stud that could actually get a new team over the top and make a big impact there? So I don't see it happening. But man, if Joey Bosa does get cut and they can't bring back Khalil Mack, like we've talked about before, that opens up an entirely new can of worms. They need Khalil Mack back desperately. But that's a conversation for another day. But thank you to everyone who checked out today's show and contributed to this buy or sell. We always love getting into it, and especially when you guys contribute to it. So thank you to everyone who hit us up at Locked On LAC. And hit us up on the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. We'll be back with you guys tomorrow as the only daily Chargers podcast around your team every day. To make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from, as well as finding it on all of our social media, not just on Twitter, but on our Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page, or me at Dan Talk Sports on Twitter and David at DroTalkSD. But as always, we appreciate you guys, and I definitely want to send a shout out to an everydayer, Frank, who just welcomed his newborn daughter, Gia, on January 19th. Congrats to Frank being a girl dad. Welcome to the club. And Gia, welcome to the Bolt fam. We appreciate you guys as always, because the Bolt community, it just means so much to us and means so much to a lot of people. So shout out Frank and Gia. We appreciate you guys, but we'll be back with you guys tomorrow. As always, until then, take it easy and go Bolts.